Hi everyone, I'm Neil from Genio Roasters, and welcome to our video about shipping coffee roasters all around the world. So today's goal is to help our customers understand what goes on behind the scenes with regards to shipping their roasters to any of the 42 countries that we've delivered roasters to. And with us today we have Sipiwe and Bridget from Dachser Freight Forwarders, and we have Ronaldo, who's our in-house logistics coordinator. So we're going to be running through a couple of questions for both Dachser and for Ronaldo, just to find out what goes into shipping a roaster all the way across the seas. Ronaldo has been responsible for shipping machines to remote little Caribbean islands, all the way to active war zones in Kiev, in the Ukraine, and to the middle of Africa and everywhere else in the world. So we are very fortunate to have her as our logistics coordinator and to have Dachser as one of our preferred suppliers to actually manage these shipments across the world. Right, so when we start shipping a roaster across the world, Ronaldo, is we need a couple of pieces of information that's vital to getting this whole process started and getting accurate quotes from our freight forwarders.
Yes.
So what kind of information do we need from our customers?
Of course. So we need shipping addresses. It has to include the unit number, the street address, the region, and the postal code. It's vital for us to have the correct information. We do need the contact details, such as your contact person, your email address, your phone numbers, and the dimensions which we would have. We would know what machine you have bought, but these are vital informations that we need.
If a customer changes their order later on down the line, then we need to re-quote, because that adds more goods into the shipment, and we have to plan out where these things all sit within a container.
Correct.
So we need to know exactly what it is that we're shipping in order to give an accurate quote, because we don't want to be in a situation where we quote or give an estimate on shipping, and then 3 months down the line a customer chose a little something extra or moved something, and then the estimates change.
Of course.
Which is of course not a problem if it has to happen, but to give an accurate quote, as accurate as we possibly can, we need to know exactly what it is that we're shipping.
Exactly, yes.
So then let's look at who can actually import a coffee roaster. People are often quite nervous about the whole process of bringing in a large piece of equipment from some country that they haven't dealt with before. So what is required to just bring in a coffee roaster into your country, wherever you are in the world?
Anyone can actually import a coffee machine or a coffee roaster. On a commercial side, you would definitely need to be registered as an importer with your respective customs officers, and as an individual you can still get to import it on a personal level.
Okay, so just like you buy something from Amazon that comes from America but you're sitting in Germany, you would just bring it in your personal capacity, and if you do have an importer's license, then you bring it in on the import.
That's correct.
But it doesn't stop you from importing a roaster in your personal capacity if you don't have a commercial importer's license.
Not at all.
Right, okay, so anybody can bring in a coffee roaster.
That's correct.
That's a simple answer.
That's correct.
All right, now there's a bunch of people involved in this whole shipping dance that happens between the customer and us as Genio and you as the freight forwarder. So Ronaldo, why don't you just run me through the shipper and the consignee?
So when it comes to the shipper, we as Genio are the shipper, and our clients would be regarded as the consignee.
Okay, so whether that is our distributor or our end user who buys from us directly, if we were shipping through our distributor, then they would be the consignee.
Correct.
But if it's the actual end user customer who buys a roaster directly from us, then they would be the
consignee. Correct.
All right. And then there's two more parties involved, of course. Dachser, who is a freight forwarder, and then there's the co-loader. So just give me a rundown of what your responsibilities are, where you fit into this bigger picture, and then just after that, just give me an idea of who this co-loader party is.
Dachser will be a nominated freight forwarder. We will handle the export part of your cargo. Once you hand over documents to us, we will then obviously start the customs and export process for you guys. we will then do the necessary on our side, and then we will hand over the cargo to a co-loader. The co-loader is the consolidator that will then consolidate all the various cargo's components, put it together in a full container, and then export it out for you.
Okay, and Sipiwe, that brings us to the difference between LCL and FCL, right?
That's correct.
And that's where the co-loader comes in. So won't you give me a rundown of the difference between the two and what's required to do both?
So the difference between the two, if you look at LCL, the abbreviation of LCL is less than a container load. And then for FCL, it's a full container load. The difference between the two is with FCL, it's actually a dedicated one shipper, one consignee in one container. From port of loading or from the loading point up until the final delivery point, depending on the Incoterms. And then when you're talking about LCL, you then be talking about a consolidated shipment where one and multiple other shippers are consolidating their consignment into one container, more like a groupage container. Then when it gets to the final delivery point, the container will be unpacked at a CFS, which is the container freight station, where all the shippers and the consignees will then be notified to come and clear and pick up their cargo. So that is basically the difference, where LCL, it's grouped, and then FCL, it's one shipper, one consignee.
Okay, so how I understand it is LCL is we basically rent a little space inside of a container, and a co-loader sells the space in this container to whoever they can to fill it.
That's correct.
So with our smaller machines, Ronaldo, if I'm not mistaken, the 3 kilo, 6 kilo, 15 kilo.
Correct.
It's mostly shipped in an LCL format. Yeah?
Correct, yes.
But when we ship something a bit bigger, like a 30 kilo, or where we ship to a distributor who buys several machines at a time,
Yes.
Then we can fit it into a 40-foot or a 20-foot container.
Correct.
And then that will be shipped as FCL.
Correct.
And it's quite an exciting time here at Genio. If we do an FCL shipment, is when you put that final lock on the container, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's a special lock that goes on, and everybody has to see this process to make sure that it's done legally and that we know that what's inside. It's like when customs at the airport asks you, "Sir, did you pack your bag yourself?" Right? So that's sort of the
correct.
same thing when they put the seal
That's correct.
on the container.
That's correct.
Okay, very nice. So that's the difference between LCL and FCL. Most of our shipments are done LCL because, of course, it's far cheaper for a customer to rent a small space inside a much larger container than it is to actually book a full container themselves.
True.
Now, when we talk about shipping, probably the most important part is the documentation, right? That's what you guys deal with mostly on a daily basis, is getting the right documentation in place so that these goods can quickly and comfortably move from point A to point B, because that's where customs get involved, and that's where all the paperwork needs to balance out to make sure that the goods that are actually stated on the documentation is the goods that are making their way across the seas.
That's correct.
So, Ronaldo, why don't you run me through the basic documents that we usually issue for all of our shipments?
Sure, absolutely. The documentation that we issue to our clients is a commercial invoice, a packing list, a bill of lading, express bill of lading or a sea waiver, a COO, and a fumigation certificate.
Okay. And this bill of lading, everybody's always asking about the bill of lading. It's my understanding that in the old days, and sometimes still today, that's a physical document that has to be couriered from us to the customer. And they have this document, and if they lose this document, then it's a giant mess.
That's correct.
How do we manage that nowadays?
At the present moment, the sea labels, I think maybe because of COVID, where physical documentation could not be exchanged as far as your original bill of lading, which was the main bill of lading back in the days. A sea label has been more prevalent document that most of the people are using at the present moment. So with a sea label, there is no need for the presentation of an original bill of lading to either customs or to the shipping line when it comes to clearance. So the soft copy that one would get from an email that gets sent with the pre-alert it's more than enough for one to actually clear the consignment using it. So the C label basically means that you can basically clear the shipment using a soft copy document instead of an original.
Can be emailed back and forth.
Exactly.
And you don't have to worry about if is this piece of paper lost or damaged or
Correct.
wet or
That's
whatever the
correct.
case may be. All right, and then what's the difference between the tax invoice and the commercial invoice? How does that differ between each other? Maybe Rennie, you can answer that first.
Of course. So with the tax invoice, it's more on the sales process. So that would include your the value of the goods that you have bought, the services that you have bought with Genio. And with the commercial invoice, it would include it's just the value of the cargo itself.
Of the physical goods.
Yes, correct.
Right. So if we included training and commissioning and installation and things like that into the invoice, then that wouldn't be included in commercial invoice because that's not a physical good
Correct.
that's changing hands.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And then we've covered the bill of lading. And where does the certificate of origin come in?
No, there's two types of certificate of origin. There's a certificate of origin that is called a Euro 1 certificate for European trade agreements between South Africa and Europe. And that certificate of origin grants one, specifically the consignee, a reduction in duties, or it can actually clear or basically give a total reprieve in duties at destination. And then there's a certificate of origin.
So wait, you mean to tell me that we can actually export to Europe essentially duty-free? There might be a little charge here or there, but using Euro 1, we can, for all practical purposes, ship between South Africa and Europe without having to pay duties.
That is correct. That is correct.
It's wonderful. And that also, the Euro 1 also replaces the need for a certificate of origin.
It may not at some point, depending on what the client requires. Some of the client would require both the certificate of origin that you get from the Chamber of Commerce and the Euro 1 certificate. But they actually share a different purpose, though they are basically stating where the cargo is coming from, as in coming from South Africa to wherever. But the other one, which is the Euro 1 certificate, then gives you a reduction when it comes to final duties at destination.
Okay, so the certificate of origin is something that we manage internally, and we issue it, and we speak with the Chamber of Commerce if it needs to be issued. It's not something that the customer has to get involved in. It's just a document that we issue to them, and we arrange for all of that internally between yourselves and ourselves.
Yes.
And that makes sure that customs know where these goods originate from. Now, in our case, of course, we are the manufacturer and the designer of our coffee roasters, so the certificate of origin will always say South Africa because that's where the goods are manufactured.
That's correct.
But if the customer maybe bought a grinder from us, and that grinder was manufactured in a different country, then the certificate of origin for that specific piece of equipment might be different from the coffee roaster's certificate.
That's
of
correct.
origin. Right. So I mean, that clarifies how customs will assign duties onto these goods that gets exchanged. And in the case of Euro 1, so when we ship to the entire European Union, we issue a Euro 1 certificate, and it's essentially duty-free, which is a huge boon in our favor when it comes to exporting our machinery to Europe and to many other countries where we have trade agreements with.
That's correct.
Okay, and then lastly, there's the fumigation certificate. Is this something that the customer has to worry about?
The customer should not worry about this thing, the fumigation certificate, because that gets handled at the origin. And the most important thing is that before this the fumigation certificate can be issued, fumigation has to be done, and an ISPM 15 stamp has to be showing on the actual pallet or a crate, so that one that does any inspection or wants to see whether something has been fumigated or not can actually see it physically from the actual crate or from the pallet itself. And then the issuance of the thing of the fumigation certificate can then be something that follows after if it's actually required.
Okay, but that's managed by us.
It's something that gets managed internally. That's correct.
Except in the case of an ex-work shipment. Okay, but we'll get to Incoterms in a minute. Just run me through the HS code. Everybody's always asking, what's the HS code? What's the HS code? what does that do and where does it come into play?
So the HS code is a harmonized tariff code. So a harmonized tariff code basically means that each and every other product or component that is on earth, that is on a commercial basis, has a specific number or code that gets coded through it. So customs would actually issue the HS code or the tariff codes per product. And
this is the same and standardized across the entire world.
That's correct.
So customs in China would use the same code than customs in Mexico.
That's correct. So the first 4 digits of a harmonized tariff code is what clearly states what the commodity is on a global basis. And then the other 2, then they would basically differ from one state to the next. But the first 4 would be of a global classification. Okay. When you go to Zambia, when you go to Europe, if I have 84 point or 84.15 as a tariff code, it will then mean that someone in Germany could classify the very same product under the same HS code.
Okay. And we usually use the HS code for food manufacturing equipment using heat.
Great.
And that sort of encompasses what a coffee roaster does. There isn't a specific HS code for a coffee roaster.
Okay.
So we have to go to the sort of class of goods that it falls under, which is food processing using heat. Right. Okay, so that covers HS codes, and now we get to the meat of shipping and things across the world, especially with regards to sea freight. So air freight has their own Incoterms, but sea freight uses some very specific Incoterms. So Ronaldo, just run me through the typical Incoterms that we at Genio Roasters usually ship under.
Of course. So Genio uses X-Works, FOB, CIF, and DAP.
Okay, and what is so that neatly organizes it from the point of responsibility.
Correct.
That's mostly up to the customer to mostly up to us.
Correct.
So Incoterms are designed to specifically state where the risk and where the responsibility transfers between the shipper and the consignee.
Correct.
So when we ship X-Works, just run me through the X-Works ship.
Absolutely. So with the X-Works, it is literally the easiest for us as shippers because we make the goods available at the factory, and anything thereafter would be the client's responsibility. So that includes the freight, the insurance, up till their destination country.
It's their responsibility.
Correct,
right.
Yes.
So it's a box that sits on our factory floor.
Yep.
And we will have a forklift to put that box inside the container.
Absolutely.
But strapping and lashing, fumigation, and everything else that is required in this process is up to the consignee in this case, in the case of X-Works.
Yes.
And people have to be mindful of that when they send a container to come pick up some coffee roasters, you can't just put a coffee roaster in the middle of a container.
Yes.
Because these things go out in the high seas.
Yes.
On an enormous container vessel. How many containers go onto a vessel?
Jeez, that's a
lot.
Thousands. Very lot. It's 1,000 of containers.
Yeah.
In terms at sea, you would definitely require securing of the load so that it gets there in one piece.
Yeah,
that's the most important thing.
I always explain to customers that if you have a sea freight container ship and that ship goes through rough waters, this thing is like 200 meters high.
Yes.
So if it sways a little bit, your goods can quite easily move 20 or 40 meters from side to side.
Correct.
So these things have to be secured very, very well inside a container, and that requires professional services. Yes. So you can't just send a container one day and say, hey, load it into the container. I got a mate who's shipping some coffee bags, and we're going to put the roaster inside, and don't worry, it'll get to my port of destination. These things have to be secured, and they actually take thick planks and nail it straight through the container, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's true.
I've seen it before where this is a rough process, and it needs people that knows what they're doing.
Exactly, yeah.
And then also, if you are shipping FCL, as you said before, is that requires fumigation.
It does.
Yeah.
It does require fumigation, so that the fumigation certificate can be issued after that. So it is very important that you look at that. Each and every other country has its own requirements, but it's very important that the pallets and the actual cargo is fumigated.
Okay. But from our perspective, X Works is the easiest.
Yeah.
Because we just make the goods available and the rest is up to the customer.
That's
I mean,
right.
of course, we'll help where we can, but the responsibility lies on the customer. Okay, then we go to the next step, which is FOB, free on board.
Free on board.
Right. Just run me through FOB, please.
So the FOB Incoterm is free on board. So by free on board on the export front of things, or from the export's perspective, it then means the shipper is responsible for the manufacturing of the cargo, for the packaging of the cargo, clearance and delivery of the cargo to the port of loading or through the terminal at the port of loading.
And in South Africa, that's almost always Durban port.
That's correct.
Right. For us here in Johannesburg, we can do Cape Town, we can even do Mozambique, but most of our shipments always go through Durban.
Would definitely be Durban.
Okay, so that puts it, as soon as it hits the ship, the responsibility transfers to the
To the consignee. That's correct.
Right. So, okay, that's easy enough. But I think in most cases, and the vast majority of our shipments get shipped CIF.
Correct.
Nolda, what does CIF stand for?
It's cost, insurance, and freight.
Okay, and how does Dachser manage cost, insurance, and freight? What does that mean for the customer? Because most of our quotes are CIF. So what does that mean for the customer?
So when we get shipments under CIF, we know for a fact that there is insurance that needs to be considered, which is the most important thing when it comes to shipping of goods.
Correct.
Your goods have to be comprehensively insured.
Okay, and this isn't your normal short-term insurance on your car. This is proper, serious marine insurance.
That's definitely proper marine insurance that one would take to cover their goods up until the final destination. So when CIF gets into the picture, it then means that the shipper again would manufacture, would package the cargo, would ship the cargo to the final port of discharge.
Not loading.
Not loading, but discharge, before it can get offloaded from the vessel. Anything that has that to do with from the picking up of the container from the vessel to the terminal itself, then the risk gets transferred to the consignee.
Right. Okay, and managing all of this, how do you as Dachser and us as Genio give our customers peace of mind that they don't have to arrange for a crane to actually lift the container off of the ship? So how can you help the customer and the consignee to actually remove these goods from the ship and get it to their door safe?
Dachser will get involved. We will, if they don't have their own clearing agents and Dachser's nominated to do the clearing, Dachser will ensure that the cargo gets taken off at the terminal, loaded onto the appropriate vehicle for what they require, and taken through to the final place of delivery.
Okay, so this is where a clearing agent comes in.
Correct.
Okay, and do you guys have officers or agents? How do we get the customer who's not in South Africa? You guys are in South Africa, so how do you get them in contact with someone from a different country?
So Dachser has 44 of our own offices. So they're actually Dachser offices where we pass on the documentation. They'll get in contact with the consignee. The consignee is happy for Dachser to do the necessary clearance. So we would then do the paperwork, arrange for the delivery, do the customs clearance on their behalf. If it's not a Dachser office, we also have our own agents, which we've been working with for many years, which are very familiar with the process, which they are known to us. They will then also get involved and assist Dachser on behalf of you.
Okay, so the customer doesn't have to worry about any of this offloading and clearing and customs and things like that. That's all managed by the freight forward.
That's correct.
And while the customer is, of course, free to nominate their own clearing agent, which many of our bigger customers or distributors do, when it's a private individual importing a roaster into some little remote Caribbean island, they don't have to worry about the process. They can just rely on you guys to designate a preferred supplier who you've worked with before across your network, across your agents and your offices, and they'll manage the process for them.
Most definitely.
Okay, wonderful. And then the last Incoterm that we have is DAP.
Yes.
So where does DAP fit into this little dots, Ronaldo?
Yes, we definitely do. DAP means delivered at place. So this means that Genio takes up a lot of responsibility. We make the goods available. We transport them till wherever place that the client has mentioned.
Which can be their coffee roastery, their
Correct.
office, their warehouse, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. So the only thing that the client would be responsible for would be custom clearance, the import duties and taxes that they would have to
And
account for.
physically offloading the machine
Absolutely.
from their truck.
Yes.
From the truck.
Correct.
Okay, but the problem with DAP is that it increases costs quite significantly because there's a bunch of middlemen involved, and we have to make sure that we cover our expenses, that we don't make an actual loss on the shipping. So we as Genio Roasters don't make an income from
Correct.
shipping. That's not our job. That's not how we make an income. That's the job of the freight forwarder.
Correct.
Yes.
But it puts quite a lot of risk into this whole process because when you guys issue the estimate, the quote estimate or the shipping estimate for DAP, we have to work 3 or 4 months in advance because it takes us a couple of months to manufacture the goods. So we are obviously going to quote a little bit more than just not enough so that we don't actually make a loss in the shipping.
Correct.
And the same on your side is you don't want to make a loss because you know when you work with us that we have to quote 3 months in advance. So DAP becomes very expensive quite quickly, whereas I think by far the most cost-effective solution is CIF shipping, and then the consignee takes over using the clearing agents, using all of the tools that we give them just for the final leg of transport.
No, that's true.
And they most likely already know somebody who transports their coffee to them, who transports their coffee roaster, coffee machine, coffee equipment, things that they use in their daily lives, and they probably already have a contact to do all of that. So it makes the whole shipping process easy and cost-effective to ship CIF instead of DAP ship.
True. I agree.
Okay, and then along this whole shipping process there's a bunch of technical terms and jargon that's used during the shipping process. Ronaldo, you always send out an email to a customer if he asks, where's my coffee roaster? You say it's at the Trans-Shipment Port. And I actually had to ask you what that means.
Yes.
So just, the guys, just run me through. What is a Trans-Shipment Port and stacks and the On-Carriage and how does that work? Let's start with Trans-Shipment Port.
So with Trans-Shipment Port, we can actually put it on a layman's term that everyone would understand. If you are catching a flight from here to Germany, then it connects to Dubai. That would be a connecting flight. So vessels do have a similar routing where it's not always direct. It transships from a specific port before it can get to the final port of discharge. So this is basically what transshipment ports would then mean. So most transshipment ports would be via Singapore. It would be via multiple other ports, Beamerhaven. It depends on where the cargo is or where the final destination of the port is. So, but in layman's term, transshipment port is more of a vessel connecting from one port up until it gets to the final port of discharge.
Okay, so just as there isn't one aeroplane that flies from Johannesburg all the way to a small town in Spain, and you have to catch a connecting flight
Correct.
to actually get there, that's what transshipment ports are. And these are enormous ports that can manage the offloading of these thousands of containers, moving them and shuffling them into the right sequence so that when it goes on to the next ship, it's offloaded in the right sequence.
Precisely.
Because you don't want your container to be at the bottom of the ship when it stops at its next port of discharge.
That's correct.
So that's transshipment. And then on carriage, I would assume, is like taking the bus from where your aeroplane actually stopped to the terminal, because I don't want to be offloaded where the plane stops. I want to be offloaded at the terminal so I can catch a taxi.
That's great.
And that's what on-carriage is at the end.
That's basically what on-carriage means. It's basically delivering multimodal, because it moved via a vessel when it got to the final port of discharge. But the final point of delivery, for instance, if it's LCL, it's actually at the CFS, which is the container freight station, which is inland. So it will then be trucked from the port of discharge to the CFS, where it will then be unpacked, and the consignees and the respective clearing agents will have then a chance to clear and then pick up from there. So on carriage, it's more of trucking from port to inland.
Right. So it doesn't. So a port doesn't necessarily have to be next to the sea. A port can always be a dry port, where it's, if you have a landlocked country like Uganda in Africa, or I mean all across the world, there are landlocked countries or dry ports where things can be offloaded.
That's great.
All right. So that's what on-carriage means. Is it actually goes on a truck to the final.
You're on-carrying it to the final CFS or final destination.
Right. And then we talked about stacks, and Ronaldo is always very particular about stacks, and stacks being firm and stacks being loose and stacks being closed. I have no idea what any of that means. So just run me down what this whole stack thing is all about.
Stacking dates are terminal dates that given by the Ports Authority. So they would actually give something between 4 to 5 days. They would again start by being provisional, which actually gives you time to plan. So by them being provisional, they're anticipating an import vessel coming into the port and then planning on the export loading. How long will it take for them to offload the import containers before they can be prepared to load the export containers?
Yeah, because these ships don't just arrive and they quickly offload 1,000 containers onto trucks, and it quickly goes to the customer, and then they quickly load up another 1,000 containers again. It takes a couple of days.
It takes a couple of days
to load and offload.
So
stacks means those rows and rows of containers that's next to port, just waiting to be placed,
onto the vessel.
Onto the vessel, right. So then we have provisional stacks, and we got
and the firm stacks.
Firm stacks. Okay, so what's firm stacks?
So on the firm stacks, these are the firm stacks that you then need to bring your containers into the terminal. So the moment the stacks are still reading provisional, you cannot bring anything into the terminal up until they get firm. Once they are firm, they will then give you the time that the terminal stacking dates are opening and the time that they will be closing, and despite the dates.
So this is when the physical truck driver drives the truck into the port, into the harbour, and his container is offloaded.
That's correct.
Okay, and that's why you're always quite specific about when stacks are closing.
Yes.
So we've got to make that date, because if we miss that date, we miss the ship.
Of course.
And then we've got to go on to the next ship.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And there's a bunch of things that can change when stacks are provisional, when stacks are firm. For example, if there's port congestion, if there's bad weather, and the ship can't actually get into port. I mean, there's 100 different places where a ship can be delayed along the process, right?
That's true.
Whether, like I said, port congestion, and it happens that a port is so congested that the ship captain just basically skips it and goes on to the next port, right?
That's correct.
All right, so it often happens that Ronaldo sends out an update, and this customer is in Hamburg, in Germany, and he very much expects his roaster to be offloaded at Bremerhaven, which is very close to Hamburg. And then he gets an update that says it's in a different port. And then everybody goes into overdrive, because why was this thing offloaded at the wrong port? It's not the wrong port. It's just one of the many little pieces of the puzzle that you guys, as the freight forwarder and as Dachser, puts together to get these roasters onto the correct ship and the correct CFS.
That's correct.
Right, so people don't have to worry if they hear that their roaster is on a truck at a different port. And we've had that before. Yeah. I've had that before when I was still doing shipping.
Yes.
Is I get an email from you guys saying that this roaster is not at the port that I said it must be offloaded at. And I get stressed out about it, but that's nothing to be worried about. That's where you come in and manage this whole situation. Okay, so that's part of the process, right? Okay, wonderful. Okay, so the last part of the shipment is done by the clearing agent before it actually gets handed over to the customer, to the consignee in this case. So the consignee would get contacted by the clearing agent, and the clearing agent would say, hey, we've cleared this thing through customs. Whether the clearing agent was advised to the customer by yourselves and said, hey, we work with these guys, they're really great, they know how the ins and outs of this country, they know how to get something through customs, or whether the customer designates a clearing agent that they have worked with before. That's the final touch point between the shipping process and the customer. Am I right?
That's correct.
Just the clearing agent to hand them an invoice and say, hey, this thing shipped with a Euro 1 certificate, or it shipped with an AGOA certificate, or whatever the certificate may be. Don't worry about it, sir. There's no duties payable on these goods. There's a couple of fees and taxes and things. Off you go. Here's your invoice. You can come and pick up your roast.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And then, Ronaldo, that's not the last of it from our side. Okay,
Yes.
that's where the freight forwarders hand off and say, okay, our job is done. Our goods have landed safely at the port of discharge. But from our perspective, we still got to get this thing offloaded.
Correct.
Okay, and there's a couple of things that you have to be mindful of when offloading a coffee roaster.
Correct.
So just run me through the smaller roasters and then the big roasters. What is required to actually offload a machine?
Absolutely. So when it comes to our Genio 3, Genio 6, Genio 6, we do advise our clients to request for a tail lift truck and a pallet jack.
Okay, so a tail lift truck is one of those trucks that has the thing at the back that
Correct.
sort of flops down.
Yes.
And then they can pallet jack the goods onto the thing that flops down,
Correct.
lower it to the ground, and then pallet jack it
Pallet
back
jack.
out again. Okay, so
Correct.
that's for smaller roasters.
Yes.
It makes it quite easy to do the final delivery, right?
Absolutely. And then when it comes to our Genio 15, 30, and anything bigger than that, we advise our clients to have a forklift on site when delivery.
Because, saving a couple of bucks for not getting a forklift and saying, hey, we'll get some guys,
Yeah.
we'll pick it up. Yeah, that's possible. But if something goes wrong during that process, remember that your shipment was insured, let's call it CIF, it was insured up to port.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure that the rest of the leg is also insured.
Correct.
So if you don't actually arrange for insurance, and the guys that you arranged with and your friends that you all got together and you said, okay, it's a Saturday afternoon, we have the truck,
Yeah.
let's just offload this thing. It's really not that difficult. We'll pick it up, we'll put it down. And it's happened. The roasters have
Yes.
fallen on their roofs. Luckily, we weren't involved in this process at all. But in Australia, we had a roaster that was lifted up by a forklift and it actually fell on its roof.
True.
And it was a mess.
A mess.
To fix, yeah.
For sure.
So people have to be mindful of the fact that this is a heavy thing
Yes.
and it's valuable cargo. And skimping on a quick little forklift rental for the afternoon just to lift this thing off, to lift
Yep.
the roaster off of the base, to uncrate them, and to make sure that this roaster gets to the roastery in one piece.
Yes.
That's well worth the expense of renting a forklift for the day. It's
Absolutely.
one phone call, the forklift comes with a driver,
Yeah.
lifts it off, and
That's it.
and you have peace of mind that this thing has been delivered safely.
Correct.
Yeah, so I much prefer that. I know that some people want to save a couple of bucks, but we're talking about a few thousand,
Of course.
tens of thousands of dollars for a coffee roaster. So making sure that the final little delivery is done professionally by people who have driven forklifts before
Yeah.
and don't lift it up by hand, that's well worth the expense, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
I'm sure you guys have dealt with some interesting stories with regards to shipping. I mean, during the Durban floods, we had a roaster inside a container
Yeah.
at the harbour, and the container was floating around with the floods.
Yeah.
And we got the roaster back here to our workshop, and when we opened up the crate, it was mud that was literally pouring out of the roaster.
Yeah.
I mean,
I can just imagine.
I'm sure you guys had your hands
We've
full with
had
that flood.
multiple claims. Yeah, we've got
Yeah, that happens, all right? And that's why we as professionals take out the necessary insurance and make sure that our goods are strapped down properly inside the container and inside the crate as well.
Yeah.
Because while we do have insurance, dealing with these things becomes difficult and time consuming and stressful and so on.
It is.
So we want to find ways of ensuring that the roaster gets delivered in one piece in the quickest and easiest way possible, using freight forwarders like yourselves who are professionals who have a worldwide network of agents and offices and contacts that you can rely on, that you've built relationships with. Well, just like we've built a relationship with you, and just like our customers have built a relationship with us.
That's true.
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been wonderful having you, Sipiwe and Bridget. And Ronaldo, thank you very much for being here. It'll be wonderful to hear from you. If you have any specific questions, just pop us a link or pop us a comment and say, what your questions and concerns are. We'd love to hear from you and get our partners like Dachser to help us to answer all the complex things that goes into shipping a coffee roaster all the way from one content to another. But then in the process, we make it easy, right? We take out that stress factor and we make sure that a roaster arrives in one piece. So feel free to contact us and get in touch and chat down in the comments, and we'll love to hear from you.